chat with Anthony Treash of Pro Football Focus. Anthony, what's going on, my friend? How are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you having the adjustment there. I had an
Yeah.
unexpected meeting come up, but I'm ready to talk some Gamecocks football. It's the game I think everybody's been kind of waiting for. This was the one in the preseason where I was really excited about because these two quarterbacks, it's an interesting one because one was really, I think, overhyped, one's underhyped. They're both kind of struggling a little bit. And I think this is a good time for both of them to show, hey, they are the real deal. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say, I'm done talking about Charlotte and SC State. Let's focus on this game this weekend because, like you said, it's the one that really matters. And I didn't label it as the most important game in the preseason, but I know many Gamecock fans did. But I did label it the inflection point. And when you certainly think about the way the season's gone for South Carolina, yes, the Gamecocks are where we all picked them to be, but it doesn't feel quite like we thought it would. This is a huge game in regards to perception, and perception is reality. Let's focus, Anthony, on the Cats, though. When you talk about the quarterback matchup, and again, what I love about bringing you on is we really dive deep into the numbers and what PFF says. I don't want to start with Levis, though. I want to start with the run game because what astonishes me the most about Kentucky, and one of the reasons, Anthony, I did pick the Gamecocks over the summer to go into Lexington and get the win. I looked at Kentucky. I think you lose 3 of 5 guys up front. You lose some big-time contributors on the offensive line. But, Kentucky has established a brand. They've established an identity under Mark Stoops, and that is being physical at the point of attack, running the football successfully, and leaning on that run game. It's been the quarterback play and the passing game that's carried them. They're averaging 86 yards per game on the ground. Anthony, that is dead last in the SEC. How surprised have you been about Kentucky? And do the numbers, is it as bad as I'm saying it is? Do the numbers spell that out to be true, that the run game has been a weakness thus far for the Kentucky Wildcats?
I am a little surprised with the way this team is built because, like you said, I mean, they've established that they're a dominant rushing team, right? They live and die by the run. And then adding just a good quarterback to it was like, okay, maybe this team can go to that next level. And, a little bit there in the top 10, people thought they were, but even without the lackluster run game. But it's kind of been surprising, I think, just how bad it's been. I mean, like you said, you can see it just in the basic numbers that they are not good running the ball. And you look at the more advanced stuff, they are not good running the football. There's nothing really different there. I mean, they're one of the lowest graded run blocking units in the entire country. Very few yards before contact. I mean, you're putting a lot of stress on that running back room to kind of create above expectation. And without Chris Rodriguez, that's a chore. It's a little bit better when you get Chris Rodriguez back in there. We saw that kind of last week. But at the end of the day, you're not going to see a hyper-efficient ground game like you did previously, right? Because at the collegiate level, running the football can be valuable. We've talked about it before. I mean, you can have very efficient rushing attacks that really lead the team to high success at the collegiate level when you have difference makers both at running back and along the offensive line. But you lost all those guys up front, and you're a little bit thin at the running back position, as we saw when there was no Chris Rodriguez in there. So, I mean, that's a huge concern. And then also, I thought with the passing game, we were going to have to see Will Levis kind of take that next step forward, right? I thought if they were going to be an efficient passing offense, it was going to have to be Will Levis, and he was going to have to take that jump everybody was expecting him to make. In my opinion, he hasn't taken a jump. If anything, I think he's taken a step back, but the scheme around him has been flawless. And that's where you can kind of see that. And even losing Liam Cohen, I mean, that's significant there. And there's been no hiccups. I mean, you look at kind of like the passing grade compared to the expected points added that they really generate on a per play basis, per pass play basis. And you see that passing grade, it's pretty middling. I mean, Will Levis, I think he's in the high 60s, maybe flirting with 70 there. It's good, not great. But you look at their efficiency level, you would expect elite quarterback play, right? And then you kind of look at the way they play and you kind of see it's a good ecosystem for Will Levis, and he's kind of executing that. He may not, I think he ranks close to the bottom of the entire country in big time throw rate. And, for people who don't know big time throw rate, it is as it sounds, right? You look at it and you say, that's a big time throw. That was pretty damn good. We haven't seen too many from those from Spencer Rattler this year. It's kind of, in my opinion, a little surprising given what he did at Oklahoma. But, even Will Levis, he's got the arm talent. He just has never been able to put that into action. And this was something we really didn't see, back in 2021. When a lot of people were like, okay, this guy's the real deal. We only saw it, I think, a handful of times throughout the season. But, I think it's an intriguing Kentucky team in the way that they are playing. It was a little bit different than expected. But I also think that they do have kind of it's specifically with their offense, they have the vulnerabilities there that I still think South Carolina should get excited about. I know the point spread, you look at it's a pretty big difference. You look at the ranking, just looking at the success each team has had so far this year, most people think, okay, Kentucky should run away with this one. But I do think that there are some vulnerabilities there on offense for Kentucky that should at least be encouraging for South Carolina fans.
I want to get to quarterback play in just a second, Anthony. Let's stick with the run game, though, and something certainly that can boost a struggling run game is a dynamic ball carrier, and certainly they got that back, and Chris Rodriguez returning his first action of the season, 19 carries for 72 yards, did have a touchdown. Here's an intriguing stat for you since we're talking numbers, Anthony. Chris Rodriguez in his career against South Carolina, averaging 7.6 yards per carry. What do you like about his game, and what do you think he brings to the Kentucky rushing attack?
Yeah, I didn't know that stat. Maybe some people would get a little bit cautious to get excited about the mismatches I was just speaking of, but I still think there's plenty of opportunity there. And I think obviously what would be a best case scenario for South Carolina is no Chris Rodriguez, kind of like there was the first part of the season, but he's back and you can kind of see some improvement there. I mean, he's a bully back, right? I mean, that's the way he plays his game. He seeks out contact, and that's the way he wins. That's the way he's really always won. In addition to kind of seeing those holes created that aren't really there anymore. So I do think that the explosive plays, I think they are capped to a certain extent. And now that's not to say it's going to be a cakewalk and be like, okay, we can stop this guy. This guy's going to go the extra mile, to really keep churning out those yards. And it's going to create a tough environment there. I mean, they're going to have to be on their A game from a tackling perspective and just kind of keying in those reads overall in the run game. But with the way he plays, you got to make sure, you can't go through him with those arm tackles because he's going to rip through them with no problem at all whatsoever. So I think that's kind of the key there because, like I mentioned a little bit ago, there's a lot of stress put on these backs with how poor the run game has been for them from a run blocking perspective. So it does give a little bit of an advantage for South Carolina. But again, that's not to say this is going to be an easy stop because this guy is a little bit different. I think he's just lacking kind of that, I would say dynamism that would give him the ability to create even beyond that, create those big explosive plays despite the lackluster run blocking. I think he kind of is a player that needs both to be his best form, his absolutely best form. So it does cap him a little bit, but again, it's not going to be an easy ride there for South Carolina.
Anthony, let's switch and talk Will Levis. You bring him up, and I think what was so intriguing is all of a sudden, out of nowhere this preseason, the hype this guy started to catch. And we were hearing potentially the number 1 overall pick. Your thoughts on the Levis hype? And again, like you said, you feel like he might have taken a step back at this point, but still obviously someone the Gamecocks do have to account for because, whether you think he's overrated or you think he's underrated or whatever, you're not talked about in that light if you don't have some serious talent. So just your overall thoughts on Will Levis and what the Gamecocks, what they need to watch for from him on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, he clearly is executing everything when it is designed, when everything goes according to plan. He's usually carrying out the offense the way it needs to be designed. And that's where, when I was speaking up top, where it was a little bit surprising because they're not putting a lot on his plate. You know what I mean? I mean, it's mostly the entire ecosystem working together as a whole, as opposed to Will Levis kind of creating these opportunities and being the reason why they're so, such a hyper efficient offense. And again, the big time throw numbers, it's a very good metric. It's a very telling metric, about an offense. And you can kind of see what I'm referring to there with right around 2% for the season. But I mean, from a pure tools perspective, I mean, overall with Will Levis, I mean, number 1 overall pick, be cautious to say, I mean, even close to that, I'm definitely lower than the consensus on that. But he does have the tools that a lot of people get excited about. When you talk an NFL draft, the tools is the number 1 thing everyone talks to, right? You got the tools, yes or no? That's pretty much the basic thing there. But I mean, his release is honestly one of the quickest I've ever seen. I mean, you're talking almost less than 0.3 of a second repeatedly, which is ultra quick there. Just a very natural thrower in terms of the way he kind of works with his mechanics. He does have that big arm, but again, we just really haven't seen him use that on a consistent basis. He can kind of get tricked into those bad decisions when the play does break. And I think that's going to be key for that defensive front for South Carolina. But overall, again, if everything goes according to plan, he's going to carry out that offense. Again, it's not so much him kind of shouldering the load there. So it is a little bit more simple for him. But I do think overall, It's going to be key to try to disrupt him a little bit, kind of, I would say, get creative from a defensive perspective.
Anthony, let's switch sides of the ball. We'll talk a little bit of Kentucky defense, and you look at the guys on that side. Again, we talk about Mark Stoops and the characteristics of a Mark Stoops coach team. Very physical, going to win at the point of attack. You look at guys like DeAndre Square, Jordan Wright, unfortunately for them. Jaquez Jones will be out for this game. Linebacker, though, is what jumps off the page to me, a strength. And it's an interesting game because the Gamecocks, against quality competition, have not been able to run the football. Kentucky's strength, I think, with that linebacker spot, going to be tough to run. It really does come down to Spencer Rattler. But first, just sticking with Kentucky, what do you like about the Cats defensively?
Yeah, I mean, there's really no, in my opinion, glaring hole, right? And I think that's what every single Power 5 team would love to have. There's no, I would say, clear vulnerability in circle. Okay, this is the area we're going to attack because this entire group is solid. I think that's the biggest takeaway. Whereas in the preseason, you were expecting this group to maybe take a step back, lost some key guys there. And, maybe they weren't going to be up to that true form, but we have not seen that so far. Like you said, they're able to stop the run. I think that's probably the biggest thing for me. The run defense has been spectacular so far. Very few mistakes made while also making those high impact plays, not missing a lot of tackles there. So I think that from a Kentucky perspective, I mean, that's really where their strong suit has really been. And that goes back to number 7, and that's going to put a lot on him, and he's really going to have to take a step forward in this game before, I would say, the SC State game, the level he was performing at. And so I would say that's the big takeaway of this group. There's no clear vulnerability. You cannot expect to exploit, I would say, a special portion of this entire group. But, you're just probably going to have to wish for some luck and against some kind of a little bit of a creativity and just standout play from the quarterback perspective for South Carolina.
Now, Anthony, I'm trying to pull up a stat real quick because, again, we always talk numbers. And here we go. According to the advanced analytics, and this might be one you've already seen, but, when you talk Gamecocks defensively, South Carolina has blitzed more than any Power 5 team in college football, but they rank 126th in sacks with 4. Is that something you've seen as well? What do the PFF numbers say about Clayton White's unit? Because, we all want to talk Marcus Satterfield and offense and Spencer Rattler, and that makes a lot of sense, right? It's more fun, I think, to talk offense than defense and scoring touchdowns and guys making plays and all that. But defensively, this is a big one for Carolina as well because you look, again, the quality opponents. I'm not trying to throw any shade on Charlotte and SC State, but let's keep it real. Georgia State, Georgia, and Arkansas, those 3 games that I look at, you have not surrendered less than 200 yards rushing against any quality opponent yet this season. And again, we had somebody calling actually today on the show and say, let your athletes go be athletes, let them loose, let them do their thing. The scary part, I think, Anthony, is the Gamecocks are, and it's still just not really resulting in, at least against these quality opponents, big plays. What say you? What have you seen from Clayton White's unit, and what do they specifically need to do? Because you'd like to think, again, you're leaning on a secondary led by Cam Smith, Darius Rush will be back, David Spalding back. But this series, you look, the reason the Cats have dominated South Carolina, they have won at the point of attack. I mean, they've just won the battle in regards to physicality. How do you think Carolina needs to attack this Kentucky offense on Saturday night?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have seen and I've noticed the blitz figures. I mean, I just looked it up just to confirm there. I mean, the highest in the Power 5 from our metrics by 3%, which is surprising, to say the least. And I think they're really leaning on variance. And when I say that is that they're understanding that, hey, this could work and we could get an interception here. We could create havoc, or we're going to give up a 60-yard play. That's kind of where we're kind of seeing, and you look at just the output. I think they have like 5 touchdowns allowed with 5 interceptions when they're blitzing the quarterback this year. Very volatile overall. It's putting a lot of stress on the back end, and considering there was a few games with injuries there, it's kind of questionable, I would say. I think, again, it goes to, you're going to see volatility with this group if that's the way you want to play. And considering the players that they also have in that pool, right? Because, I would say, and we've talked about it before, like there's a lot of players with high potential, but it's very spotty, and it still is very spotty, right? And I think you have guys that you can't count on, like Cam Smith and even Rush there too. But, overall, it's just a spotty group. And that's where I would say the variance increases, and the range of outcomes could be even more severe in either direction. And we've seen that so far. And I think we probably will continue to see that. So I think I think this helps from a run defense perspective, I think they're going to be fine. It's not going to be easy, like I said, but I think they're going to be fine against Kentucky. I just look at this, how they play the game from a defensive perspective against the pass in the way Kentucky plays. I think there could be some pretty significant plays from Kentucky from a passing perspective. And then again, it goes again, can number 7 for South Carolina, can he rise to the occasion and match? Because that's where I'm kind of at. So it's very risky. It's aggressive. It's not for everybody with the way they play the game. It can work in a lot of times. It can lead to those upsets, right? But it also can lead to very underwhelming single game performances. So a wide range of outcomes, right? I mean, you're going to see a lot of emotion potentially just with the way they play throughout the rest of the season in SEC play.
High risk, high reward for sure. Now, Anthony, moving to the offensive side, again, that's what everybody wants to talk about. And, a game like this, Rattler versus Levis, right? You're going to get few quarterback matchups that are as intriguing as this one. And, again, as I talked to somebody earlier this week, they said, this isn't a game that has college football playoff ramifications or anything like that, but it is a big game. And I think it'll probably turn out to be one of the best games of the weekend. Anthony, I don't think this is a bold take to say South Carolina is not going to win this game without quality play from number 7. You just don't go on the road and beat a quality opponent in the SEC if your quarterback doesn't play well. We talk about how big of a game this is for Marcus Satterfield and for Shane Beamer and this team. This is a huge game for Spencer Rattler, man, because you're obviously one of his biggest supporters, and there's plenty of doubters out there. And I said this all summer, and whether it's fair, unfair, what have you, Anthony, if Spencer Rattler's the guy that I thought he was when we got him, I feel like he goes out there, balls out, and he beats the Kentucky Wildcats. What say you?
I agree. And this is a huge, huge game. Not just for, everybody involved with South Carolina, like you mentioned, but just for him in general, just considering, the guy's been he's taken so much heat and beatings from just the entire public over the last year that, he needs to show up and he needs to show, hey, I still have it. I'm still that, Heisman favorite. I still have it in me. Because honestly, we haven't seen it this year, and I don't think anybody's arguing that. Now, last week, those interceptions, they're not on him. That's not his fault. He played a great game overall, but it was it was an underwhelming opponent there, of course, South Carolina State. Don't need to, no slight to them, but it's true. And that helped out a lot. And you look at the way he played even in that game, he still struggled, I think, to kind of see it right away. He was very slow to kind of pull the trigger, a little hesitant. And I think that kind of goes with the way he's kind of trying to be groomed to fix his previous flaws. And I think it's leading to larger issues. And maybe Spencer Rattler can improve that. Maybe his old form is the quarterback he is, and trying to get him to play another game otherwise, it's just never going to happen. And maybe that's something, everybody needs to come to grips with. But, he is going to have to kind of see things develop better. And I think that the telling thing with me is, and I've talked about it before, is just when he's getting to that point where he sees a loss in the offensive line, there's heat coming his way. The pocket's a little muddy. He's not his first instinct before. He'd keep his eyes downfield, but he would break it immediately. Sometimes that would result into running into a sack because he's trying to get by a defensive lineman. Sometimes it would result into a jaw-dropping throw downfield. Those were his best moments. But now he's trying to stand tall in the pocket, and he's trying to make something work. And that's where we're seeing a lot of bad throws and a lot of bad decisions. And he's not necessarily trying to play kind of that longer developing style, that schoolyard football. He's trying to, if he sees something start to go wrong, he's getting the ball out. And you want that play to a certain extent, but that's not what made him great. What made him great is his ability to kind of create those plays. And he's not anymore. And I don't know why. The only people that could probably tell you that are South Carolina internally and Spencer Rattler himself. But I think it's very clear what his flaws were. And there was issues with, he would lean on that play style too much, and that would kind of cap what you could do overall. And I think it's just trying to fix that, and it's kind of forcing the fix, even though he may not just have it. And then maybe it's something longer developing that he does have to work on. But I think that's kind of the big takeaway there. I talked about just kind of letting him go. And I thought last week, again, he played well. They did a good job of kind of marrying the run and the pass there. A lot of good play action concepts in there. That's kind of where some of the best plays were had, best throws for number 7 overall for the game. But I mean, I think for this one, you legitimately just have to tell him, do whatever it takes to win the game, right? You can't play that conservative style that we have seen and kind of that hesitant and I don't want to say scared, but just kind of that cautious style overall. I mean, he's going to have, I think, overall, if I'm, and I don't want to speak for the coaches, they have their own method, of course, and, obviously highly successful, and I have a lot of respect for him. But I guess from my perspective, if it were me, I would just flat out say, we need a win here. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a fight. Do whatever you can to help us win the game instead of trying to, I would say, kind of play a game that, he can't play and the offense as a whole can't really play, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. And I agree with you. I think that's what fans also on the offensive side, Anthony, they want to see is more aggressiveness. Hey, I can live going on the road, playing a tough Kentucky team and losing the ball game, but you want to feel like you go down swinging. You don't want to feel like you go down with bullets still left in the chamber, and some of the offensive play calling has made you feel that way at times. Anthony Treash, a Pro Football Focus. Anthony, before I get you out of here, I'm not gonna ask you to nail down a score prediction, right? I never do. But when you look at the numbers, you look at the matchup, you look at this game, obviously Wildcats are a 10.5-point favorite, over-under set at 49. How do you see this one playing out? What's your overall feel on this game for the weekend?
It's interesting. I mean, I would probably say South Carolina keeps it closer than that spread indicates. Maybe it's a little bit more higher scoring than that total indicates too. But again, I don't think we've seen enough from the South Carolina offense to think, they're going to put up enough points to really come out on top. That's kind of where I'm at. I think, again, there's a higher chance that they do that. But, again, we just haven't seen that so far. We haven't seen that fire. And that's where I get a little hesitant to say, whereas in the preseason, I was more confident. I picked them to win this game in the preseason. But now, it's a little bit more difficult. I think their path to getting there is a little bit more difficult. But maybe my preseason prediction comes out wrong. I mean, either way, I'm going to be right either way at this point. But yeah, I'll probably lean Kentucky victory, but I think South Carolina puts up a little bit more of a fight. It's a little bit closer.
Anthony, I felt one final thing. I can't help but feel like I thought Kentucky was overrated at 7. I feel like they're still overrated now. I don't know whether the Gamecocks are going to win this game or not, but do the numbers indicate that Kentucky's a little bit overvalued right now?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think they are overvalued, and actually could pull up the PFF power ranking to get the precise ranking that they do have in there. So we have them at 8, and again, that's kind of leaning towards the nature of the way they play, and I think the schematic aspect of it does play into that. And personally, I mean, I disagree with the power ranking from time to time. I disagree with it. I think they are a little bit overrated. But from a numbers perspective, it's leaning that they are still kind of in that. They're not in that top tier, but they're kind of in that next group. And that next group, honestly, is 15 teams deep, probably, if not more. So I would definitely say they're in the end of that tier, whereas the numbers are kind of a little bit leaning more towards they're in the upper end of that tier. So I think it's with the way they are, I don't think there's a right answer. Like, I don't think you can argue with anything. The only thing you can't, even debate is that they're like a top 5 team or something like that. They're definitely not that. But I think I could see a scenario be like, they're still a top 10 team, just slightly. Maybe they're into the top 25 back end team. So it's definitely an interesting group the way they play, and that kind of plays into it.
Anthony Treash of Pro Football Focus. Anthony, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. I appreciate you taking the time, and looking forward to doing it again next week. You guys go check out Anthony's work, of course, all across social media, Pro Football Focus. Those guys do a fantastic job. Anthony, as always, man, thank you so much. We'll do it again next week for sure.
Of course. Take care.
Yeah, man. Take care.